Hey, greetings folks, Performance Reviews, where I give you the review from the technician's point of view. And today we're going to talk about Kirby and is there really a difference between the generations? There are some much older Kirbys than this, but the thing that you hear me repeat and say, and it is basically 90% true, is that from 1989 to present, that all Kirbys are the same, basically. And that is true. In this video, we're going to go into autistic detail of what the little minute differences are. And we're going to use these two Kirbys as an example because they were manufactured 10 years apart. One is a 1996, this G4. The other is a 2016, though it says 2017 on the front, but most of the pieces were made in 2016. You get a rough idea. And you know what? This one on the right, the newer one, is exactly the same as what's sold door to door today, minus the color. It is literally part by part the same. Where the G4 has some differences, we'll go and show you. So stay tuned, hit that subscribe button. I have two Kirbys apart. I have a Generation 4 over here to the right, and this is a 1996. And then I have a Generation 10, and it was manufactured in 2016. So exactly a decade apart. And I want to discuss some of the subtle differences with Kirbys, because there aren't very many, but there are some little differences that do make a big difference. And there are some parts that from the G4 onwards, when we go to the G5 and newer, that are out of factory specification. And I want to talk about the differences between those. I also want to just highlight some of the improvements and some of the changes. There are some things that are just static that really didn't make a difference. Okay, let's talk about one of the first differences, or non-differences, which are the motors. The motors are exactly the same. There is no change between the motors. At some point, they did change the internals of the switch, and from my experience, the newer switch is slightly more reliable than the older switch for whatever reason. They changed the material, switch lever was done, no big deal. Something that was significantly different, and you do feel it when you turn on and off the Kirby, is the switch lever went from being this is stamped and casted and stamped and pinned together to just a piece of bent wire. It's not a huge difference, but it is a difference. You can see some cost savings there. Now they did improve the fan over the years. Both of these have the newer fan, non-issue. I will say the biggest difference between the motors is at some point in the G10 generation, not before that, the bearing plate, the front bearing plate, is made out of specification on some models. This one doesn't have it, but some of them will have bearing wobble, and so it's very common for a lot of the newer ones to have this bearing plate replaced. Other than that, these are basically the same thing. You know, they changed color of wires, it's not a big deal. The grounding, this grounding wire would go away on the later models, and I believe that has to do with the part I'll talk about next. It would also change this gear ratio. So the self-propelled gear ratio drive, as I talked about in my G3 video, which if you're really interested in Kirby's, go check that out. I do a full restoration and have a full review on the original Generation series. But they changed the drive ratio on these over the years, and there's probably, I think there's 6 different drive ratios, and there's like 4 different size of these little cogged belts. So those are very specific to the model. You can interchange them. The problem with changing the sprockets on the gears is on some of them, the wires will not clear here, depending on the sprocket size. So I generally like to keep those within the generation whenever possible. And one other subtle difference is there is now a fusible link on the newer motors. I have never seen this fusible link go, but it is just something to be aware of if your Kirby were to die. The carbon brushes are interchangeable, the fields and the armatures are all the same in here in the bearing plates. So those are the motors. Again, really not an issue or a difference. Now the next thing they would change, this would start again with the G10 generation, is that the main housing here, and you can see all these little grommets here, this is polymer, and it's a very strong polymer. I think this is a good change. This makes sense to me. I have not seen these break or crack, and it saves about a ½ ounce of weight, so not as much weight savings as you'd think, but you're not casting it out of aluminum, so a little bit less expensive. You're also no longer making and molding this piece separately like you do on a Generation series before that. So as you can see, this is a separate piece. This is This is aluminum, and aluminum's a soft metal. Man, I'd almost say when I flex this with my hands, it's hard to say, but when you flex this versus this, yeah, I would almost say the plastic is stiffer in terms of the rigidity of, we'll call it a frame. And we can see this was made in '96, and we can see, again, date stamping here. If it will show, that says 16. So this is December 16. This is July 16. So that is a difference between the frames. Now, there is a difference both inside. If we look, you see that there's like a raised ridge. That would go away. No idea why that went away. This piece remains the same on all of them, as separate. So externally, when we talk about these, that's where we get kind of a big change. The gasket went from being this, it's like polyurethane, to just this cheap piece of foam, but it is bigger on here. I have never noticed a difference. I do see that these sometimes get a little eaten. That was a Generation 5 change, if I remember correctly. This thing, exactly the same. The other thing is that the wheels would change. They still have a tire that's soft in the middle, and they would just change the style of that. And at some point they would change the size of the distance between the wheels on the axle for, again, no apparent reason, and then change it back. So the G7s have a different length axle for, again, no apparent reason. And that's a lot of the changes. They'll make a change and then go back. Again, not a lot of changes here. You would also see that this lever would become, again, these are both cast parts, but you can clearly see there's more meat here for your hand to use on this lever. But the taper on this lever doesn't seem to wear out as much as the taper on this. So that was something that was done. And I think the one thing between Kirby's, while we're talking about changes, is when it comes to screws, they've never used the standardized screws. There's always a mess of different types of screws, and I know where they all go by heart because I've done thousands of these. But if the consumer was trying to fix this themselves, or you have a new tech, they get real confused which screws. And then on the early, the G4 and the G3, and some of the G5s, you have a mixture of Phillips and a mixture of T20s. So yeah, you do pull out a lot of tools when you're doing some of these earlier ones. So that's just something to be aware of. I don't think the new wheels really make a difference, but comment below which wheel style you like the best. All right, going on to the transmission. I had talked about the gear lever being different. We can also start to see that the handle fork is significantly different between the two. I don't know if that shows on camera, but yeah, they are a different size. And as we get around to the back side, that's where things start to change. So we notice visible differences in materials. They went to a polymer arm. These are not wearing out. This is fine. From this cast piece, again, that makes sense. And I'm sure once the casting mold wears out, they were switching to polymer. Again, that all makes sense to me. The gear material does appear to be a different material. The bearings here, they kind of just sit directly in. And the new bearings have a plastic bushing. This bushing, you'll see that there is a brown bushing here versus this white bushing here. This appears to be Teflon or some sort of super slippery material. This appears to be some sort of predecessor to Teflon, still very slippery, like Xylitron, something like that. Nyltron is another one of them. Whatever this is made out of. Both of these wear because the axles don't sit on bearings where the wheels make contact, so they rely on these synthetic bushings. They both wear, but they wear after a long life. The other thing I've noticed that is different is just the overall housing material is different. The way the casting is done on this, and it's hard to show on camera, but like the casting mistakes and the casting marks, and this continues throughout the theme of Kirby's. When we go from, I'd say, the tradition on, you start to notice that the casting gets just significantly worse on all Kirby parts. Again, it makes sense. It's a vacuum cleaner. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it is just like a noticeable difference when we're dealing with them. Anyways, I don't see these really failing at different rates. So, but those are some of the differences. Now, the other differences that are big, that do cause a lot of failures, and I have a whole video, actually I have multiple videos on this subject. So starting after the G4, this thing is out of spec. This is the original G4, 1996. Again, almost, yeah, it's just old. And we can see that this is still pressed in. You can see what color the metal is. We can see that this thing still retains its P shape. So both of those are A-OK. Now the reason that this one is in here is because we now see that the P shape has started to wear a little bit. This might be okay still, but the yeah, that has happened, and that happens to all of them. After starting with the G5, this will happen to all of them because the metals, we can see that the metals and the castings are out of spec on the newer ones. We can see that these little arms, you can see that one is heat treated, one is not, and this one is just fine, where this one has more wear even though it is significantly newer. And that's a huge deal, is that that is out of spec and that fails for everybody. Alright, now I'm really nitpicking, but the casting differences between these, you can just tell I believe what they did was they cleaned up this casting, and they've just stopped cleaning it up. So this has much sharper edges on it. Again, harder to show on camera, but when you see them, they are different. When you pick them up, they are the same weight. But you also notice that the polishing and the purity of the metal on this is significantly better for whatever reason. And I'm looking at, actually, the serial numbers on these. We have 896, and we have 6/2017. So this is put together with new old stock parts. Nothing wrong with that, but just something to be aware of. All right, let's go to the headlights. First of all, it took Kirby way too long to switch to an LED. There's nothing wrong with the LED. LED is a good thing. There is a lot of circuitry in this for having 3 LEDs coming off a 12 volt. I don't know why there's so much circuitry in here. They could have just swapped the bulbs, but they didn't. They actually casted a new part for that, and it looks a little sleeker. It still looks pretty old and dated. This definitely has a 90s vibe to it. Incandescent bulb. One of the things I think people, they don't really use this feature, but these guys are different. They are significantly different. We can see that the handle fork interacts with just something that's been stamped out versus an extra piece that was pinned in place, but it's rounded, so the interaction's a little bit better. Not a huge deal, but it is a little detail. And then going on this is a metal throw lever that is cast and nicely rounded off. This is a plastic throw lever. Nothing wrong with that, but it is, again, just a difference showing something. The other difference, I will say, is the yoke material. The earlier yokes, whatever these bearing blocks, much higher quality metal than what they use here for whatever reason. These tend to get gouges, and if these are not greased and taken care of and cleaned, these tend to wear a lot faster than these do. Just moving this back and forth, yeah, this feels gritty. This is smooth, despite this machine not having any lubrication in a long time. Other than that, all these frames, all the rest of the stuff is interchangeable on here. And this circuit board will actually pop out of here and fit very nicely in here if you wanted to upgrade this to LED. Another random change is the cleaner head. Something I think it was really welcome to a lot of customers is they put this handle that folds out starting on the G5 and goes onwards. There's several different colors and styles, but having this extra bit of leverage for the belt, where this just had this square rotating block. We would also see the instructions actually change with it, which is a nice attention to detail. As far as instructions go, they used to tell you where instructions both in colors and numbers. and then later that sticker just completely disappears. So I have been saying for years there's no reason that Kirby couldn't have just put a small DC motor on this and powered this and had a quick disconnect. There's so much room in here for this design for that to happen. Heck, they could even have an interface and reuse this hole and put a micro switch in here, but they don't. The cleaner head castings, again, noticeable difference in the purity of the aluminum. But something that was done is, if you see here, the LED to indicate the brush rollers turning went to opposite sides, meaning that the G4 brush roller and the G5 and newer brush rollers don't interchange the way you would think they would. So if we actually look at the rollers, and this is the G4, this is a newer style roller. If we look at the end caps, they changed the end caps. The magnets are different, and they used to have a polymer housing with the magnet. They went to just this style. This is the better brush roller. The other thing they would do is the chevron pattern would get more aggressive. This is a very kind of lazy chevron pattern. This is a interrupted, more aggressive chevron pattern. Both of these build up hair quite a bit because of the big gouges for the ingest bars on these. Yeah, not really a huge difference between the rollers. And of course, the generic roller is made by the same company who makes them for Kirby, who was owned by Kirby. So Cleveland Wood Products makes the genuine and the replacement, and there is not a difference. So there's not a real reason to go with a genuine roller when we're talking wood rollers. There might be something else on Amazon. And I do want to just show the difference in the housings. We have the G10 on top right now. Again, not a huge difference between them. While we're talking differences, the 90s styling of the handle would change. The handle grip angle would change. Also, the cord style will change. This has one screw holding it in place. You still get that NEMA style plug down there. They would add a V hole, and they would change it. Again, same sort of plug, but they would change it so that there are two screws holding it in place. That's more of a style change, but there's the handle. The handle is, well, it's got like an extra grip on it, but nothing special, no real differences there. On to one of the significant differences that's happened over the years. First is the bag material. The bags originally were part of the filtration system, that meaning the external bag, and then the paper bag that went in this. They would end up with HEPA paper bags and eventually switch to synthetic bags. Upon switching to synthetic bags, this bag material is nothing more than a protector and is significantly thinner. They've also cheapened up the zipper a little bit. Cost savings, unaware, I'll have a link below, but Kirby's all use the same bag after 1987. They all use this universal fit, and this fits both the F-style and the twist-style bag. If you're not using these, you're doing a disservice to your lungs and to your vacuum. These allow for 10 to 20% more airflow by themselves while offering HEPA filtration, and I'll have a link below to those. Now, this is probably one of the bigger quality of life improvements that was made. They used to use this really thin, it's like Mylar almost thin. The fill tube on the newer machines, again, there's multiple versions of this fill tube, because Kirby, there's a wide one, there's a tapered one, and there's a narrow one. So there's 3 versions of this. Know which one you have according to your generation. So this fill tube would go to this like crush-proof material, and this is a good example of where it really isn't crush-proof. And I don't think this one has any holes in it, but I always have to check with a flashlight for holes in these. These develop really small pinholes. This one is good, but again, you always need to shine a flashlight and check these. The hole is very obvious when it fills a hole. So that's quality of life improvement. They would also improve the bag docking situation to be a little bit better how it fits on there. Other thing they would do is do the most obvious thing in the world, is they'd get rid of the mini emptier. So it used to be, the idea is that this was a boxy, big hollow thing. See how big that is. It's a big hollow thing. And the idea is that the things you shouldn't have sucked up would get stuck in here. Well, that really just impeded airflow and created air turbulence. So one of the things they would do is they would get rid of that and just go to the straight flow design. Again, this improves airflow a little bit. On paper, if we put a suction gauge between these two, you're going to get like 1 inch of working vacuum maybe. So minimum in terms of noticeable performance, but in terms of debris moving into the bag, that's kind of a big deal there. And these are interchangeable. In fact, this one has a crack in it, and we'll be getting the new style fairly soon. There are some bad actors online who will tell you that these machines have radically different performance and that one performs greatly different than the other. Now, my opinion of Kirby's is they always clean average. You can go buy machines at Walmart to clean about the same. You can go into your local vacuum store and buy a $500 or $600 vacuum that will spank these. So we're not here to debate if it's the most powerful cleaner, because we know it's not. I just want to show you the difference between these, because somebody's going to point out that one is so much more powerful because it has 10 extra CFM. Well, that doesn't seem to make a difference. And I've already adjusted them both. They both have brand new brush rollers. Wow. Actually, I think the newer one that's supposed to be more powerful left a little bit more pet hair behind, but they both did exactly the same. They left a lot of sand behind, they snow plowed, some breakfast cereal, you can see. And again, these are average performing machines, and being that this design originated in 1989, it's okay that these don't perform the way a lot of newer cleaners would. Well, I hope that information about the difference in generations has been useful. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Definitely go check out our Patreon if you want to see exclusive content, and have yourself a wonderful day.